That's delegate number 42, Leanne Martinelli, Mrs. Vermont International, and her husband, Marcus.
Delegate number 43, Mrs. South Carolina International, Allison Tennell, escorted tonight by her husband, Danny. Mrs. South Carolina International, delegate number 43, Allison Tennell, and her husband, Danny. And that was the final delegate in evening gown, group number 2.
You know, I've been married for almost 4 years now, and I would think that it must be very special for these couples to share moments like that on stage together.
It definitely is, and congratulations, by the way.
Well, thank you very much. And if you've met my wife, and you have, then you know that I'm a very lucky guy.
True statement.
And speaking of lucky guys, there's still one more group of them backstage waiting to escort their lovely ladies.
So let's wrap up our 2017 preliminary competitions with our third group in evening gown.
Continuing now with delegate number 44. She's Mrs. Oklahoma International, Brandy Bowers, escorted by her husband, Donald. Delegate number 44, Mrs. Oklahoma International, Brandy Bowers, and her husband, Donald.
Delegate number 45, Mrs. Georgia International, Melanie Caceres, escorted by her husband, Alex. Georgia International, delegate number 45, Melanie Caceres, and her husband, Alex.
Mrs. West Virginia International is delegate number 46, Brianna Williams, escorted by her husband, Tyler. That's delegate number 46, Mrs. West Virginia International, Brianna Williams, and her husband, Tyler.
Delegate number 47, Teresa Ortega, Mrs. Kansas International, escorted by her husband, Kirby. Mrs. Kansas International Delegate number 47, Teresa Ortega, and her husband, Kirby.
Delegate number 48 is Mrs. Pennsylvania International, Amanda Lieber, escorted by her husband, Chris. Delegate number 48, Amanda Lieber, Mrs. Pennsylvania International, and her husband, Chris.
Delegate number 49, Lindsay Clausen, Mrs. Texas International, escorted tonight by her husband, Brady. Mrs. Texas International, Delegate number 49, Lindsay Clausen, and her husband, Brady.
Mrs. Sweden International is Delegate number 51, Nancy Dulles Larson, escorted by her husband, David. That's Delegate number 51, Mrs. Sweden International, Nancy Dulles Larson, and her husband, David.
Delegate number 52, Shayna Smith, Mrs. Tennessee International, escorted tonight by her husband, Sergeant First Class Grant Smith. Tennessee International Delegate number 52, Shayna Smith, and her husband, Sergeant First Class Grant Smith.
Delegate number 53 is Mrs. Sri Lanka International, Netmi Wikramabahu, with her husband, Harsha. That's delegate number 53, Mrs. Sri Lanka International, Netmi Wikramabahu, and her husband, Harsha.
Delegate number 54, Mrs. District of Columbia International, Helen France Meister, escorted tonight by her husband, Chris. Mrs. District of Columbia International, delegate number 54, Helen France Meister, and her husband, Chris.
Delegate number 55 is Veronica Shaw, Mrs. Asia International, escorted by her husband, Ashwin. Mrs. Asia International, delegate number 55, Veronica Shaw, and her husband, Ashwin.
Delegate number 56, Andrea Brower, Mrs. Arizona International, escorted tonight by her husband, Ross. Arizona International, delegate number 56, Andrea Brower, and her husband, Ross.
Lindsay Wright is delegate number 57, Mrs. Arkansas International, escorted by her husband, Max. That's delegate number 57, Mrs. Arkansas International, Lindsay Wright, and her husband, Max.
Delegate number 58, Terry Grothaus, Mrs. Ohio International, escorted by her husband, Chris. Mrs. Ohio International Delegate number 58, Terry Grothaus, and her husband, Chris.
Delegate number 59 is Mrs. Maine International Renee Adams, escorted by her husband, Aaron. That's delegate number 59, Mrs. Maine International Renee Adams, and her husband, Aaron.
Delegate number 60, Laurie Long, Mrs. California International, escorted by her husband, Russell. Mrs. California International Delegate number 60, Laurie Long, and her husband, Russell.
Mrs. Florida International is delegate number 61, Vida Hargret, escorted by her husband, Kristan. That's Mrs. Florida International Delegate number 61, Vida Hargret, and her husband, Kristan.
Delegate number 62, Stephanie Welter, Mrs. Minnesota International, escorted tonight by her husband, Wade. Mrs. Minnesota International Delegate number 62, Stephanie Welter, and her husband, Wade.
Delegate number 63 is Michelle Aurelius, Mrs. North Carolina International, escorted by her husband, Dunham. That's delegate number 63, Mrs. North Carolina International, Michelle Aurelius, escorted by her husband, Dunham.
Delegate number 64, Mrs. Ghana International, Beverly Jekti, escorted tonight by Justin Brown. Mrs. Ghana International, delegate number 64, Beverly Jekti, escorted by Justin Brown. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the last preliminary competition for 2017. How about a hand for all of our delegates?
And how about a round of applause for their husbands? You know, it's basically impossible to top the evening gown competition. But right now, we'd like to invite someone out who you met just a little earlier tonight.
Performing the hit song Symphony, please welcome back to the stage, Janelle Arthur.
I've been hearing symphonies. Before all I heard was silence. A rhapsody of you and me, and every melody is timeless. Life was stringing me along. Then you came and you cut me loose, with solo singing on my own. Now I can't find a key without you. Now your song is on repeat, and I'm dancing on to your heartbeat. And when you're gone, I feel incomplete. So if you want the truth, I just want to be part of your symphony. Will you hold me tight and not let go? Symphony, like a love song on the radio. Will you hold me tight and not let go? Sorry if it's all too much. When you're here, I'm now I'm breathing, and I was running out of luck. I never thought I'd find this feeling, but I've been hearing symphonies. Before all I heard was silence, a rhapsody of you and me, and every melody is timeless. Now your song is on repeat, and I'm dancing on to your heartbeat. And when you're gone, I feel incomplete. So if you want the truth, I just want to be part of your symphony. Will you hold me tight and not let go? Symphony, like a love song on the radio. Will you hold me tight and not let go? Now would you please help me make welcome back to the stage all of your 2017 Mrs. International delegates. Symphony, will you hold me tight and not let go? Symphony, like a love song on the radio. Will you hold me tight and not let go? Will you hold me tight and not let go? Will you hold me tight and not let go?
Ladies and gentlemen, Janelle Arthur and all of your 2017 Mrs. International delegates.
Well, I am always amazed at how we so quickly arrive at the end of the show, and it's already time to say goodnight.
Well, the night can't end without completing this almost picture-perfect view on stage. All we are missing is our reigning Mrs. International.
Please welcome back to the stage Mrs. International 2016, Priscilla Pruitt.
Well, folks, that really does bring our 2017 Mrs. International Preliminary Competition to an end. Tomorrow night, we'll be back for a brand new competition, starting off with the Photogenic Award.
And then we'll announce our top 15.
But don't forget, you can make it a top 16 by voting for your favorite on the Mrs. International website. You have until noon tomorrow to get those votes in.
That's right. We've got all sorts of surprises planned for the Mrs. International Finals pageant right back here tomorrow night at 7:30.
Join us again tomorrow night for all the excitement and to cheer on your favorites.
Until then,
Good night, everyone.